Hey there, how are you? I've got 3 questions to start with. Who of you has ever made a donation? That's everybody. Who of you has ever made an investment? That really should be everybody, and it's close to everybody. Now for the hard part. Who of you has ever invested into the same organization they'd given a donation to? Right, it's 1, 2, 3, it's close to nobody. So why not? Why the hell not? It's the same money, isn't it? Donation money? Investments. Why do we treat it so differently? This question does not only apply to money, it also applies to our time, whether we work or volunteer. It's the same divide. We have that divide inscribed into our systems as the non-profit and for-profit divide. And it's sometimes actually very useful to prevent abuse and to incentivize certain behavior. But I would like to talk about this special relationship today and how it's shifting under our feet and how it should shift. Now, whenever charity and markets meet, we tend to be a little skeptical. And sometimes for good reason. For example, we wouldn't want donated organs to be traded to the highest bidder. But the divide has a deeper historical root and is rooted in finance. For just most of human history, growth was very low. In fact, before the Industrial Revolution, economic growth was about 6% per century. Since the Industrial Revolution, it's about 6% per year. And the non-profit sector was funded and is primarily funded out of a small share of the investment proceeds of economic growth. Now you see where this is going. In a time when we have become increasingly uncertain about economic growth, in a zero interest rate environment with potentially very low growth going forward, and a growth that has produced, besides lifting many people out of poverty, also increasing inequality in our societies, we wonder if that engine will still suffice to fund the solutions to some of the world's toughest problems. So there's a lot of evidence, I think, for a new relationship and for social ideas becoming a new focus of business in a very productive way. Because, after all, ideas aren't either for-profit or not for-profit. The divide is useful, but only because someone claims to do good doesn't mean they're social. But on the other hand, only because someone's making money off an idea doesn't mean it doesn't benefit all of society. So let's examine this a little closer with an example. Let's go back in history, 150 years, to a deserted country alley in the vicinity of Münster, where a man named Friedrich Wilhelm Reifeisen saw farmers in destitute because they couldn't afford the next year's seed after a bad harvest. He started not a bank, but a civic association, the Brotverein, which is basically a not-for-profit insurance scheme of farmers between each other, making sure that they could afford the seed for the next year's harvest. Now we know the rest of the history. Today, over 600 million people across the world are members of credit unions and cooperative banks. Now we don't really consider it part of the social sector anymore. It's a long evolution of an idea. It took over a century. Now, when you look like this into our business environment, you see ideas like that, you see stories like that all the time. Consider open education, one of the biggest growth fields of our time, born out of non-profit ideas. Consider green, decentralized citizen energy, again one of the biggest growth areas of business today, born out of non-profit ideas. All social entrepreneurs starting fields, triggering change in a way that mobilize people like you and me to participate. Initially without a financial motive, because we wanted to be part of something bigger, part of a solution. And then as the solution grows, it grows into a field of business over time, and it actually does benefit many people. Now, there'll still be side effects. But the biggest difference between the world of Raiffeisen and our world today is that it no longer takes a century or more for ideas to be able to tap into the potential of markets. It takes only a few years. And by market, I don't only mean financial markets. I mean resource markets. Consider the example of Wikipedia, which was only started 13 years ago, and it's already the biggest work that mankind has ever produced, by a large margin. Almost entirely out of citizen engagement, and only to a very small part with financial resources. But it has built a sector that is actually very, very valuable and has an enormous economic importance. Why does this happen so quickly today? It happens because not only do we live longer and are better educated and more mobile, we also live in a close to zero transaction cost world. It's a good thing that we don't only live in a close to 0% interest rate environment, but we also live in a close to zero transaction cost world where everybody can be hugely powerful, not only as a consumer, but as a co-producer of solutions. Let's go back to that money. There's a way to think about the non-profit and for-profit world as opposite ends of a spectrum, the risk-return spectrum. So over here, you've got the extreme end, the extreme risk. You're certain to lose all your money if you make a donation. And where else in the financial markets are you going to find that sort of certainty? It's wonderfully certain. You're going to lose 100% guaranteed. Now over on the other end, you've got the market rate return. Now where do you think most of the interesting ideas, like the ones I've just cited, are? On that end or on that end? They're somewhere in between, and it changes over time. So I'm just going to make an investment and put that here for the next speaker who dares to pick this up for the benefit of all. But let's stick with this picture for a moment, because I think it's hugely important. How we think about money will determine how we think about growing solutions for the good of all. If you consider building a work, for example, a hybrid dam, you're not going to one bank and ask them, now what's the interest rate on my dam, please, today? You go and syndicate money from very different sources. Some low-risk investors, some high-risk investors, and yes, you will see some very typically public authorities investing at a loss position. So we're already used to the idea that we put together money from various different risk-return motivations to enable the growth of a specific idea. I believe we're at the brink of starting something like a social banking sector that does exactly that to help social entrepreneurs and social ideas grow, so that it doesn't take a century, but it only takes a few years. I think that's going to be a big part of a story that you could call the social turn. And make no mistake, it's not a very cozy world over here at the non-profit end. From my experience, I would consider donations as like the hardest currency of all, especially the toughest market to sustain over time. Now, the non-profit for-profit divide is a very legally useful way to prevent abuse, as I've mentioned, but we do need the resources of the entire spectrum. Ideas travel from one end to the other. They can also travel back, and it doesn't apply to all ideas. It's our decision whether we consider an idea ready for the market or not, or initially repaying some of the investment we've put into it. All of this happening across what I would call the hybrid finance spectrum. Now, if this seems theoretical to you, it's not at all. It applies to all of you in your everyday decisions. Is what you're making a donation, or is it an investment? Are you considering the possibility of, for example, a minus 50% return? Someone returning half the money you gave them because that's what corresponds to their business model? Are we considering a 0% loan or a minus 5% loan? I believe we're going to see a financial industry developing around solutions that will benefit that will benefit all of us, regardless on whether they are on that divide. Because it's already happening, it's just happening unintentionally. If we can make it happen intentionally, it's going to be a huge advance. And business is going to be the main driver. Because if you look at the ideas I've just cited, from open education to green energy to the sharing economy to peer-to-peer banking and microcredit, all of these are ideas that were once considered solidly on that end. I believe we live in an age of discovery and innovation when it comes to finding solutions that will benefit all. And those are maybe the biggest growth reserves we have in a world in which every business can copy every other business all the time. So we're going to see places like Dresden compete for the change makers that will attract other change makers to bring ideas from that end of the spectrum into a field where they can get the resources they need. For business, this means that we will need to ask businesses not only for their business model, i.e. a way to attract capital, but also we need to ask them for their social model. A way, what is your way to attract people to your cause? Remember Wikipedia. It wouldn't have worked if you'd paid these people. But because we provided a very good reason to contribute in the largest work of mankind, we actually produced it. The world isn't on one end or the other end. We're all players in between. And maybe the social turn, it's not an accident. The organizers here called it a social turn as it harks back to the biggest transformation of the German economy we're witnessing. The energy transformation or energy turn, Energiewende, actually provides a useful framework for what I'm talking about. We used to think of energy that comes from a few big players. We didn't really think of ourselves as anything but a consumer. Today we produce close to 30% of energy in Germany among ourselves, citizens, decentrally. What was a complete tree-hugging non-profit activity 40 years ago has become a market. Maybe we can dare to think about many social ideas that we have solidly over on the non-profit end today as ideas that attract more people. People asking, should I put in my time, whether it's work or volunteering, or should I put in my money, whether I consider it an investment or a donation or anything in between? And if we can make that happen, we will witness a social turn that will not cost one end more than the other, but that will truly benefit all. Thank you very much.